Hey everyone, and welcome back to my new and returning players series. Today we're going to be tackling the PvE content of World of Warcraft, and there's a lot to cover, so let's just jump in. First up, leveling. So this is the first type of PvE content that you'll encounter in the game. Of course, we've covered it in previous episodes, but not really the newer leveling content of Battle for Azeroth and Legion. Now, it is almost exactly the same, but the main difference is that it's a lot more freeform. So the level scaling system means that you can do any of the Legion zones in any order, and then any of the Battle for Azeroth zones in any order, with Legion taking you up to 110 and then BFA taking you up to 120. Then for Battle for Azeroth, the Alliance players quest through Kulturas, while the Horde players quest through Zandalar, and that means that you can actually level from 110 to 120 on Alliance and Horde and get unique content either time. Then leveling itself, of course, is done mostly with quests, but quests do not end once you hit max level, because once you hit max level and complete some basic prerequisites, you will unlock world quests. Now, these are quests that spawn in and out over time, and they have rewards that scale up as your character becomes more powerful over time. So each day you'll get a faction emissary. They will task you to do 4 world quests for a faction, which will give you a big burst of rewards, and then you can just do as many extra world quests as you can find on the map. Okay, with that covered, let's talk about dungeons. So, dungeons are a really large part of the game, both for leveling and for endgame. Of course, I've covered them for leveling in a previous episode, so you can check that out. So today, I'm going to be talking about the endgame. Now, dungeons come in 4 different difficulty modes: normal, heroic, mythic, and mythic keystone. We're going to start off with normal, heroic, and mythic, though. So each Battle for Azeroth dungeon can be done on any of these difficulty levels, with the exception of King's Rest and Siege of Borealis, which are mythic only. Now, as you move from normal to heroic and from heroic to mythic, you'll find that enemies will have more health, they will deal more damage, and some bosses will even have new mechanics for you to contend with. Of course, this difficulty does come with greater reward, with each difficulty level dropping better and better gear than the last. Now, there is one last difference to cover between these 3 bits of content. So, normal and heroic are, for the most part, done through the looking for dungeon system. Now, this matches you with other players, as we covered previously, and it will put you into a random Battle for Azeroth dungeon that's either on normal or heroic mode. Now, they are both on the easier end of the scale when it comes to difficulty, so being in a random group is fine. However, for mythic, it's a good bit harder, and it therefore requires a pre-made group, either through your guild, through friends, or through the pre-made group finder that I talked about last week. Then mythic dungeons also have a weekly loot lockout, and what this essentially means is that each boss is lootable once per week by you, so basically it's ideal to do each mythic dungeon once per week. Okay, with that covered, let's talk about mythic keystone. This is a new difficulty mode that was added in Legion, and it has been continued into Battle for Azeroth. So when you complete your first mythic dungeon of the week, you will receive a mythic keystone. Now, you may have noticed that there's a pedestal on the entrance of each mythic dungeon. Well, if you place your keystone into the pedestal, then you will activate mythic keystone difficulty. Now, based on the keystone that you put into the pedestal, you will have a harder level of difficulty, as well as some new mechanics, which are called affixes, to deal with. So these can do things such as having enemies drop a damaging pull on the floor whenever they die. You can have enemies maybe empower each other when they die. Or you could, as an example, just have bosses be significantly more powerful. Now, your goal is to complete the dungeon within the time limit. If you do, then you will get a keystone for a higher, more difficult level for another dungeon. Now, keystone dungeon rewards do not drop on bosses. They are instead found in the chest at the end of the dungeon. So if you miss out on the timer, don't worry, you still will get your loot, but you'll get a keystone back that will decrease in level, which means slightly less rewards, but decreased difficulty. Then finally, you will receive a chest of loot at the end of the week, and the gear in that chest will depend on the highest level mythic keystone that you have completed in the previous week. So it gives you this big burst of rewards each week based on how far you're able to push a keystone in the previous week. Okay, next up we've got Island Expeditions. These are a new feature in Battle for Azeroth. You queue up for them at the map table in your faction's dock, which is located in the Zuldazar Bazaar for the Horde, or Borealis for the Alliance. Now, islands are role-agnostic content, which means that anyone can queue up. You'll be match-made with a team of 2 other players on normal and heroic difficulty, and then you'll arrive on an island. Now, Azerite's been bubbling up all over the place, and both factions want to gather as much of it as they can, so your team will be there, but a team from the other faction will also be there, and both teams will race against each other to collect as much Azerite as they can by completing events, finding mining nodes, killing enemies, and completing quest objectives and mini-bosses and things like that. Now, the enemy team is driven by a really advanced AI that kind of has them act like real players, and there's loads of different enemy teams, and they all have their own personalities, tactics, and movesets. There's a total of 9 islands overall, however, the layout of enemies and objectives is randomized each time, which means that they pretty much never are exactly the same. Now, islands are available on normal and heroic, match-made, or then mythic if you have a fixed group, and plus a PvP mode, which I'll cover next week. Now, on the whole, they're an excellent way to farm up artifact power in Battle for Azeroth, and that's one of the main reasons why you'll be doing them. Next, we've got Warfront, which is another new type of content in this expansion. They have an Alliance versus Horde theme, which has led to some assuming that they are PvP, but they are in fact PvE. So the basic setup is that your faction wants to capture the enemy stronghold, so you along with 19 other players are sent in to lead the war effort. And there's a lot more to it than just fighting. You'll have to build up your base by contributing resources to buildings. Of course, they are resources that you have to go out and gather in the zone, like iron and wood, just like it's a real-time strategy game. Buildings, of course, can be used to spawn AI troops, to unlock upgrades for your AI troops, unlock some upgrades for you, spawn in siege engines, and things like that. Now, while the AI troops are great and they are needed later on, much of the initial fighting is done by your team, who've got to go out and capture key parts of the map in order to unlock buildings and troops. It's a big team effort that players can contribute to in many ways. You can focus on combat, you can focus on resource gathering and building, and then as time goes on, you'll eventually break down the enemy's gates and take out their leader. So that's the actual Warfront that you'll do, but it's important to understand that they follow a bit of a structure in the metagame. So at any given time, one faction will own the Warfront. The other faction will then be turning in resources to help their war effort, with this progression being shown on a bar. Now, once that bar is full, then the enemy faction will be able to queue for a Warfront scenario for a period of time. Once that bar is full, then the enemy faction will be able to queue up for the Warfront scenario for a period of time, and then once that time is up, the Warfront will be theirs, and then your faction will be turning in resources to help out the war effort. And that's pretty much the pace of how Warfronts work. Next, let's cover raids. These have long been a staple of the endgame of World of Warcraft, and today raids are available on 4 different difficulty modes. We've got Looking for Raid, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic. Looking for Raid is a match-made mode that is the easiest in terms of its level of difficulty, and basically it's a way to see the content and get some mid-level loot. Now, the raid opens up a bit slower in LFR difficulty, usually over a period of a month after the raid releases on Normal and Heroic. Moving on to Normal and Heroic, both the modes are quite similar. They are flexible in terms of party size. They can be done by groups of between 10 and 30 players. Now, Heroic is quite a bit harder than Normal, and some bosses do actually have additional mechanics on Heroic mode, but of course in return for the harder difficulty, Heroic does have better loot. Then Mythic is the hardest difficulty, and it's really the hardest content in the game in many ways. It's tightly tuned for a group of 20 players, and it's rock hard, with the race to world first on Mythic difficulty for a new raid being closely watched whenever a new raid comes out. Now, Mythic difficulty raids are typically the domain of big organized guild groups. Next, we've got the Brawlers Guild. So this is a pretty cool, unique bit of content, and the Blizzard have been keeping going since Mists of Pandaria. Now, its availability has been on and off based on seasons, and it will be returning at some point in Battle for Azeroth. Now, what it does is it gives you a series of ever harder solo boss fights, and it's all in the theme of a secret society where players are hanging out and watching fights. Now, the rewards are mostly cosmetic and bragging rights, and it basically is just a really enjoyable side activity for PvE focused players. So that's an overall look at the player versus environment content of World of Warcraft. Overall, you'll be navigating your way through this kind of up the ladder. You'll be trying to get better gear and do harder difficulty modes and really challenge yourself and get that big sense of group achievement when a whole bunch of you and your friends or your guild mates are able to overcome like a new milestone, like killing a raid boss for the first time, which really is one of the more satisfying experiences in gaming. So there you go, that is the PvE content of World of Warcraft. Join me next week where we talk about the PvP stuff, and for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.